Now, the Mood of the Nation poll for India Today, done by Sea Voter last week, had given a verdict on opinion on the unemployment situation. 72% of those who are polled, more than 1 lakh people being polled, said it's a serious situation. Only 10% said unemployment at the moment is not a serious situation. Has the Modi government been able to generate jobs was one of the questions. They have been able to do so, said 30%. They've done a little, is 24%, but not at all was 34%. So on both those counts, when it comes to unemployment, this appears to be the government's big challenge. Let's raise the big questions on our political talking point. Are jobs the biggest challenge for the Modi government? Does any party today have solutions to the job crisis? Do Rozgar Melas really help? Or are Rozgar Melas a PR stunt, as the opposition calls them? I'm joined on the show by Professor Santosh Mehrotra. He's author Reviving Jobs and Agenda for Growth, visiting professor at the Center for Development, University of Bath. Syed Zafar Islam is the BJP's former MP and spokesperson. Salman Soos is Congress's spokesperson. Siddharth Zarabi, managing editor, Business Today TV. Appreciate all of you joining us here on the news today. Let's get straight cracking into that question. First to you, Professor Mehrotra. Let's get a view of someone who's been studying this before we go to the politicians. How serious do you believe the job crisis is? Do you believe these Rozgar Melas address the issue, or are they simply flirting, tinkering with it?
Let's just remind ourselves, Rajdeep, that there are in the entire public sector only 40 lakh jobs, of which the government has promised it's going to fill 10 lakhs. 40 lakhs amounts to less than 4% of the total number of jobs in the country. So 96% are obviously in the private sector, mostly informal, of which 10 lakh they are going to fill in the last 18 months, as the PM said, and a few thousand are being offered, which were all delayed appointments. Those letters are now being offered. So let's just remind ourselves, Rajdeep, that the larger problem is in the private sector. And in 2017-18, it's the same government's data which had told us that we are at an unemployment rate which is at a 45-year high, and that only continued to rise before COVID and until COVID. So the government may hand out melas and appointments, appointments which have already been made. That doesn't mean that jobs are suddenly growing. More importantly, millions of people went back to agriculture. That means there was massive deindustrialization that was taking place despite Make in India post 2014. Because what we saw was an absolute decline in manufacturing jobs, and in COVID, some 60 million people went back to agriculture between 2020-21, and they have mostly not returned. Government data is telling us this. That's because the economy the organized sector has had a V-shaped recovery, but the economy has had a K-shaped recovery, because the unorganized sector, which began suffering from 2016 onwards thanks to demonetization and a poorly designed and badly planned and implemented GST, has taken extremely severe hit, and the PLFS data is showing that unemployment has risen post 2017, and if it is showing that the worker participation rate and the labor force participation rate is rising post 2017, it is only because unpaid family labor has increased, and none of the government spokespersons realize this, recognize this, are willing to mention this. In my writings, and most economists who work seriously on employment issues know and understand this. Unpaid family labor is a sign of distress. Final point, Rajdeep, and I'm finishing. If unemployment is at a historic high and the employment rate has been falling, it is because it has shown increase recently, but it has gone nowhere back to the level it was in 2012. This is the point, that unemployment was only 2%. PLFS government data is showing it was 6% in 17-18, And although it's fallen slightly post the K-shaped recovery, most of the increase in employment is in unpaid family labor. There is some regular increase, but regular employment increases always take place.
Okay.
Our workforce is so young, they are always looking for work.
You've made some very strong points based on data and your research. This is not a politician simply sounding out. This is one of India's leading economists who's looked at jobs very closely. Syed Zafar Islam, respond to that, because what I find fascinating is the government just replied in Parliament in the monsoon session a few weeks ago saying vacancies in jobs in central government alone are 9.64 lakhs. So it appears that the Prime Minister in these Rozgar Melas is essentially filling up some of those vacancies that have existed for a long period of time. It's not creating new employment. You're only giving employment to what was promised. These are vacancies that your own government is admitting exist at the moment.
Rajdeep, as far as this Rozgar Mela is concerned, the Honorable Prime Minister had tweeted on 14th of June 2022 that 10 lakhs job, 1 million job will be given in next 18 months, and this is a part of the exercise which he has already announced on 14th of June 2022. So far 5.5 lakh job which has been handed over. This is a central government job, or this is a government job. Now, having said that,
sir, this is to fill vacancies. Sir, this is to fill vacancies. Vacancies as per an official government reply in Parliament monsoon session is 9.64 lakhs, sir.
Yeah, so let me just reply to your question,
sure.
Rajdeep.
Please do.
I heard you. This is the same question you're repeating time and again. So all I'm trying to tell you that, see, the government cannot absorb all the potential people who are looking for a job, because we all understand that the government has limited opportunities, but the rest of the opportunity lies in the private sector. And what is important for us, or for any government, to create the environment, come out with a legislation which actually give boost to the business and create more and more opportunities. So as far as the government is concerned, and despite all the negative thing which has happened during last few years, COVID, Ukraine war, all these things happened, yet we have been able to take strong measures, structural reforms, and ensure that the business is growing, and a lot of policy reforms which has been taken and policy decision which has been taken, which is business friendly, plus the capital expenditure of the government of India, huge capital capex which has been part of the budget has been made, a large allocation every year on a year basis to ensure that there is an investment by the government, and the private sector also complement by investing as well. But the problem what we were facing initial years, and I'm sure Mr. Mehrotra is fully aware of it, that we had inherited some biggest problem of the century. That when during this UPA time, they were giving loans like there is no tomorrow. So from it, the balance sheet of 18 lakh in 2006, it ballooned to 53 lakh in next 6 years. Since 1947, it was only 18 lakh, and then it ballooned to 52 lakh, 53 lakh, purely because left and right loans were distributed based on the recommendation by a certain family. What happened as a result in 2014, when we inherited, banks was in a really terrible shape. Companies which had taken loan were not in a position to repay those loans. They had built so much excess capacity. There was no headroom for new investment to take place from the private sector. So now the bank was in bad shape. The company had taken loan, and then they were not in a position to repay, and as a result, they were not looking for any expansion. So we had to deal with this problem. We didn't come out with a white paper. Otherwise, everybody would have the country's economy would have collapsed. And Mr. Mehrotra, as an economist, would understand that. Now, listen, just 10 seconds. Now we are in a situation where we have come up with, we have solved every situation which we were dealing with. Today, economy is thriving. We are firing all cylinders, and job is also being created. Lot of infrastructure investment is taking place. The capacity is
okay.
Now
So you made your point, sir. You've not, sir. Sir, you are claiming that capacity is being increased, jobs are being increased. I'm only going to look at the figures, and I'll put out those figures. Basically, 2023-24 projection, real GDP 5.7,
Ask
employment 1.1. But Salman Soos, respond to what you've just heard. What is being suggested by the government is that that whatever's happened over the last years is a legacy of the previous 10. That therefore, when you look at employment, don't look at it only in the context of 23-24, look at it in the context of what happened before 2014. Does the Congress, for example, have a plan for generating jobs? It's very easy today to say the Modi government hasn't done enough. What has the Congress done? Many of these vacancies were there even when you were in power.
Rajdeep, first of all, Zafar should not talk about banks at all, because under their government, almost 15 lakh crore rupees have been written off by banks. Most of them are public sector banks, so they should not talk about it. I think the less they talk about it, the better it is.
Can we please talk about jobs?
Let me talk about jobs. First of all, we should all understand, and Mr. Mehrotra can vouch for this, that when we talk about the unemployment rate in India, where unemployment is calculated only on the basis of those people who are either in the labor force. Okay, a lot of people are not in the labor force. I'll give you an example. If we had to have the same number of people who are at the same average as the Chinese do, please let me finish. India needs currently 180 million people more, 18 crore people more in the labor force. If we have to reach the average, that is the global average. The Chinese are much above the global average. We are much below the global average. So just don't look at the unemployment ratio, which is still very high. A prime minister who promised us 20 crore jobs in his 10 years is giving out 51,000 appointment letters. And many of these appointment letters are, by the way, not new appointments. These are promotions also. Okay, not just vacancies, these are promotions also. And the Telegraph did a great story on this. I recommend that people read that. Now, let me tell you what we did before this prime minister came on board. This is CMI data telling you, okay? CMI, let me just give you CMI data. In the manufacturing sector, in 2016-17, there were 51 million people who were employed. In March of 2023, 35 million people have been employed. That means there's a drop of 31%. Let me now give you UPA versus NDA. Between 2004, 2005 to 2012, 75 lakh non-farm jobs were created per year. 7.5 million, 75 lakh. Between 2013 to 2019, which includes some of UPA, but most of NDA too, the job creation has been 29 lakhs. That means there is no comparison between what we did and what they have done. Now you said, how will you create jobs? That's a reasonable question to ask. That is why the Congress party is the party of governance in India. And let me give you some examples of what we should be doing. First of all, we would never do something as crazy as demonetization, because that killed small and medium enterprise jobs in this country. We would never have the complexity of GST that they brought in, because that is not letting the economy to grow. We would not have the kind of tax terrorism we see right now, because you're not letting businesses function. You're choking businesses. How will you create jobs if your private investment isn't there? One more thing, Rajdeep, for our viewers to keep in mind, and this is a warning sign for us. If you look at the profile of workers in India, our workers are aging. Even though we have such a young population, our worker profile is aging. That means younger people are not getting opportunities. It's going to create a huge problem in this country, and this government has no answers except for this gimmick of 51,000. 51,000 is a drop in the ocean.
You're saying your party, if it was in power, would not have committed what you believe are the mistakes of the Modi government, like demonetization, but you're not offering me a pathway to recovery through job. 1 minute. I want to bring in Siddharth Zarabi, because we've heard the two politicians at length. Siddharth Zarabi, the Union Minister for Labour and Employment, Bhupendra Yadav at a recent Rozgar Mela said 9 years ago, India used to be among the 5 most fragile economies. We are now among the 5 largest economies. Claims that more than 1.5 crore jobs have been created in 9 organized sectors, including IT, manufacturing, trade, transport, education, hospitality and medical. Is the truth therefore somewhere in between? The government, because data at the moment with this government in particular, depends on who provides you the data. What is the reality, Siddharth, as is being suggested? Is unemployment really as bad as it is? And is there very little effort, or there may be effort, but not enough jobs are being created?
Rajdeep, the fact about the quality of employment, unemployment data in India, that has suffered for decades, and it's not a unique feature that we can pin down on the current time frame. I would say that the comparison instead of politics should be between pre-COVID and post-COVID. There are 5 sources of data that professional economists, analysts, and even journalists who can manage look at when it comes to employment. And among that 5, the PLFS, the Periodic Labor Force Survey, followed by the EPFO, followed by the Quarterly Survey, then Manrega, which is quite a good indicator of rural wage creation, and then finally the CMI. There are 5 different sets. You can cut and look at it whichever way. I will just cite one particular angle for a debate regarding the data. And to cite former CA, Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, he has, in a very extensive, detailed recent paper, said, and I'll try and just give the headline number. He says, post-COVID, rural employment rose 17.7%, urban 12.8%. This is in one particular category. There are dozens of categories. In paucity of time, the fact that India has a huge youth population which is looking for gainful employment and is not able to either find quantity jobs or quality jobs is a significant issue. The government can only do so much. I think at some point we also need to get into this frame of mind as responsible citizens that we cannot keep burdening the government and the exchequer, and we see what is happening with welfareism. As far as the private sector is concerned, I'm sure no one in the panel will deny that that is now playing the hero's role as far as employment creation is concerned, including some particular sectors. Again, data is something that we can debate because we do not get one comprehensive data. So your guess is as good as mine. But if you look at it on the ground, the private sector is where most of the job creation is happening. So can we just put it on the government? I would toss that question back to you, Raj.
Professor Mehrotra, you heard Siddharth Zarabi saying this isn't an easy problem to tackle at the moment. Let's be clear, no one has the kind of comprehensive solution to ensure that you meet the job challenge of a younger population. Do you see a magic bullet solution out there? Something the government could have done that not done, that Rozgar Melas, are they the way out in at least filling up these vacancies?
No, the Rozgar Melas are simply for show. There is no question about that. We know that. Let's not even go there. I think there's no point in debating that one. I will answer your deeper question in a minute, but let me just address the 3 points that Siddharth ji talked about. Post-COVID, there has been a massive increase in rural employment according to the PLFS. This is precisely what I began by saying. I said this. Massive increase in rural employment took place because there was massive loss in jobs in the urban areas across the board in services and in manufacturing, and 60 million people became dependent on agriculture, which is the major reason why real wages in agriculture and across the economy, hence as a result, have been systematically falling. And these, please remember, that we already had a situation pre-COVID where 42% of our workforce or total workforce was providing 15% of the country's GDP, and then we added 60 million to it. As a result, the 42% went to 46.5% government data. And most of these people are doing practically nothing. Yes, they are saying that we are doing something, but that is to save face, for point one. Point two, Female workers have joined in rural areas. They are tilling land and so on. And this is unpaid family labor. Unpaid family labor is recorded by PLFS, and that's what is showing up in the increase of so-called employment. Surjit Bhalla and Chris Subramaniam are saying the same thing. Point 2, government cannot be burdened. If government cannot be burdened, then why is it that 45 to 50% of total public expenditure in the now industrialized countries is accounted for by government, and only the rest is accounted for by the private sector? We have to grow our health and education sectors. That's why the government expenditure needs to increase. But tax revenues have not increased. If anything, this government has reduced corporate taxes, and yet the corporates are not investing. Private investment is at a historic low, although it has risen recently. The fact of the matter is that this government inherited 31% of GDP as investment to GDP, public and private taken together. In other words, I'm taking on board government investment. They're trying to compensate for the fall in private investment. Today, after a recovery, we are still at 29% share of investment in GDP, 2 percentage points lower than when this government came to power. Can you imagine? It was lowest at 26%. Third point, and repeatedly Mr. Siddharthji has been saying, oh, we don't have data, private sector, we don't have data. We have the data. The government is producing it. The government's PLFS has for 50 years been covering the private sector, organized as well as unorganized, rural as well as urban, and that's what I'm citing. So this rubbish
What
that
is
put
the
out
silver,
that we don't
Professor,
have the data, I mean,
Professor, what is the silver bullet? It's
Yeah,
not as if
bullet,
we don't
bullet,
have
come into
data.
that.
There are different interpretations of data. It depends on where you get your data from. My point is,
Correct.
do you concede
You are
that
right.
this is a very
You are
big,
right.
this is
You
a
are
major
right.
challenge? There is no silver bullet out there.
let me begin on that. Firstly, can we get our growth rate back to the 8% on average that we grew at between 2004 and 14? In the last 9 years, we've grown at 5.7. What is the way we are going to get growth back up? Investment, and investment is low. The government is not being able to evoke and trigger the animal spirits of the private sector. Public investment is only a fraction of total investment. It's not going to be able to do it. Thirdly, if you want serious job creation in the non-farm sector, tourism, yes, is a good thing. Services have already been creating a lot of jobs, but we need to develop our manufacturing sector. In the last 30 years, there has been no government which has provided us with a manufacturing strategy. Make in India was not a manufacturing strategy. Performance-linked incentive scheme is not a manufacturing strategy. It is just picking winners for 14 sectors, of which only 3 or 4, 5 or 6 have taken off. We have to focus, as Salman rightly pointed out, have to focus on the MSMEs. The MSMEs have suffered very severely. The size of debt that is to be extended or loans to be extended to the MSME sector has to be increased. But, you know, let's just remember that if the banks of our country, which are the ones which are supposed to lend to the MSME sector, are not going to lend to the MSME sector, but to continue to lend to cronies, we will have write-off of loans. And when you have write-off of loans, then...
Can I stop you for a moment? Can I stop? Okay. Can I stop you for a moment?
Yes,
you believe that the real employment will come through the MSME sector. It will come if the government invests more. Now, let's be fair here. The banking sector, and there Syed Zafar Islam did have a point, was in far worse shape pre-2014 than it is today. The MSME challenge, Zafar Islam, is a very different one on the other hand. We have a opinion poll. During our opinion poll, we asked who has benefited the most from the Modi government's policies. More than 55% said big business, Zafar Islam. Now, we can qualify the fact is MSMEs are the ones who have suffered the most demonetization, GST, and certainly during COVID times. And they possibly have the greatest employment potential as well. Over the years, a lot of informal labor which could have got formalized through the MSME sector. Do you concede that rather than these Rozgar Melas which are only filling up vacancies, the government needs a better comprehensive plan for MSMEs?
Well, Rajdeep, let me respond to Mr. Mehrotra first. Any economist who understands economy very well, like Mr. Mehrotra does, if he criticizes our government and compare with UPA and does not acknowledge the problems which existed and problem existed to even when we assumed the government and inherited those problems, like the fragile economy, the policy paralysis, the huge amount of loan given to unproductive loan, because there are many reports which was published during that time where it says that debt curse, there was a report from Credit Suisse debt curse. Most of the loans were given at that time were actually had become a bad debt, and we had inherited those problems. So the write-offs had to be done.
So you inherited problems, but we are now in 2023.
Private sector.
Sir, we are now in 2023, and there was a decline in growth pre-COVID as well.
Just a second, Rajiv, just a second. Allow me to complete. So we had to first recapitalize those banks. A lot of money had to go to the bank to bring them back into order. Secondly, he was talking about private investment. Which company will make the investment in the country? Tell me which company was in a position to make investment. Everybody was sitting on huge debt taken, and those debts were actually, those money were either siphoned off or unproductively used. They were not in a position to invest any more penny, and the capacity utilization was less than 60%. Who will invest more? Government had to take this burden, and they started investing. So public investment was more than required, but yet government had to do it, so government had done it. For MSME, we had a comprehensive policy. We did support MSME, continue to support MSME because MSME needed some support, and that support was given to the MSME sector. Yes, there were issues. We resolved those issues. There were a lot of issues, a lot of legislation had to be made, like GST.
Sir,
we made the legislation which slowed down economy for a while. But it does do like a hockey stick recovery, and we
Sir, we don't have a hockey.
Recovery,
Sir,
and a lot of jobs is
we have a recovery.
Last point.
Yes, go ahead.
Last point, Rajdeep.
Yes.
No, forget about K-shape. I disagree with this K-shape. There's a very smart recovery and something which we very clearly acknowledge that. Away from that, let me tell you the last point. There is no payroll mechanism here which you can capture on a real-time basis that how much jobs have been created. There is no mechanism. Government is trying to do that. Unlike in the developed countries where you have every day whatever job has been created, that payroll data does give you that idea. India, we don't have. Whatever job has been created in formal sector, like EPFO gives the number, it is growing. Your Naukri.com, it is growing. Every other space you find, job is growing. Because in private sector, job is being created, but there is no system to capture those data.
Okay.
The only way to capture
Sir, you made your point. You made your point. Salman shows particularly. Sir, you made your point. You made your point now. You made your point. Salman shows EPFO data, for example, that the government often cites, suggests that there has been employment created, perhaps far greater than certain other numbers and data indicate. And the government points to that EPFO data and says, look, things are much better today than they were. Please look at what we've gone through over the last 4 years, and therefore post-COVID, we are in a better place.
So first of all, when Zafar says that we don't have the data that he's talking about, and he's right, but wasn't it Mr. Modi who said that he would do in 60 months what all other governments could not do in 60 years? Why have they not been able to do this in 10 years? That's a very reasonable question to ask them. Why isn't that this data that they talk about? Why did they make these false promises to the people of the country? I did not make these promises. Mr. Modi made the promises. Now, as far as the EPFO, when you talk about EPFO, for example,
I will respond to that.
I think EPFO data, or when they say that new jobs are being created, EPFO is a very volatile database. You get leave one job, you move to another job within the formal sector, and it will show up as a new employment. It doesn't take care of people who have already left. So I would not get into this EPFO business. You have PLFS, check that data. Now, when you ask Rajdeep, you have to ask the people of the country what political party is going to wrestle with this issue, and that's a reasonable question. But let me tell you what the
provide
approach
me
is.
the answer. Provide me if tomorrow the Cong. No, 1 minute. I have limited time now.
Let me give you the answer.
What is the answer?
Let me give you the answer, Rajdeep. The point is that these guys have basically supported big business, and there's one simple data point you have to see. If you look at new investment, private sector investments, there's a lot of investment, but it's happened through very few projects. That means big ticket items are happening. That means a lot of money is changing hands. The Congress's approach is going to be focused sharply on micro, small, and medium enterprises, because that's what creates jobs around the world.
No, you need
not
both.
just in India.
Who says you don't need big ticket infrastructure projects?
And they have ruined this economy. We, on the other hand, have to rescue it only through the MSME. The big businesses can continue doing their work, but the new government that is going to come, the India government, is going to support MSMEs.
Okay. We've heard two different views of how are you going to create jobs. The Congress says we will support small MSMEs. The government of the day says, look, we first had to inherit problems from the previous government, and we have now stepped into a world where we believe we are in a better position to create jobs. Either way, Rozgar Melas are only filling in government vacancies, remember. And in many instances, especially in departments like railways, many exams have been held over for years and recruitment has not been provided. There are structural, systemic problems that need to be addressed as well. Rozgar Melas may get the headlines. Will they actually create the kind of jobs, quality jobs, this country will need? Thank you all very much for joining us on what's been a very educative debate.